Hi, folks. Welcome back to Beyond the Call. We're continuing now with part four of our conversation with retired Captain Matt Frost from the Australian Army, helicopter pilot. Please make sure you've listened to part 1 to 3. It's an interesting conversation, and let's get on with part 4. Thanks.
Oh yeah, I'm
How did
just
you
it's just a Swiss cheese model, isn't it? It's just you just oh my
like?
God, I'm just trying to
I,
imagine I'm just trying to imagine the consequences of being over in a war zone, basically off your tits, firing a gun high, or
yeah,
drunk on some sort of
and
fume that has
and
affected you cognitively.
and you've hit the nail on the head. A lot of the time, you didn't know you were being affected until it was too late.
Yeah,
In any number of these cases, certainly the serious ones, the onset was so rapid that you would feel intoxicated very quickly. Be like, something's not right. Then maybe there would be a smell, maybe not. But a lot of the other ones were so insidious you didn't know you were being affected.
yeah,
And such is the nature of hypoxia, and it its effect on you is very different. So what affects me, what makes me flushed and gives me a rapid pulse, can just make you feel pretty okay.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
that because there was no correlation between individual crew members for a lot of this, none of us could agree what the smell was. None of us could agree what the effect was. The effects were all over the chart. We were like, what the hell is happening? But we knew something was pretty serious, and we didn't trust our aircraft anymore. We couldn't risk manage our way out of this anymore. We couldn't ignore it either. And there was
Yeah.
enough of us that were taking it seriously that the command chain actually had to take it seriously. So I'm going to skip forward a couple of months. So from that exercise, they were like, okay, no more flying. You guys seem pretty upset about this. We think you've just lost confidence in your aircraft. We'll deal with it once you get home. So they flew all their aircraft home on C-17s. They flew us home. Um, we then, once we were back in Darwin, we had some time off. They called essentially a roundtable meeting, like
Yeah.
a mate's circle. I'm going to call it. So there were 21 pilots who were flying Tiger at that stage. 20 of us had agreed to not fly at all until this problem was solved. So the brigadier flew up, and he had two colonels with him, and they sat in this round circle with us, and they're like, okay, what's the problem? And my OC, being a stand-up leader of men that he was, and I will follow that guy to the gates of hell. He was such an amazing leader. Was trying to outline the problem to the commander, to the brigadier, and this is a brigadier who had grown up, who'd flown porters. I think he'd flown jet rangers occasionally. I think he had a qualification to fly jet rangers still, and that was how he kept his currency. But he hadn't ever flown the Tiger beyond basically a passenger ride. So he had
Yeah.
not enough time in the seat. He didn't really wasn't familiar with the systems or anything. And so we were trying to describe to him, or my OC was trying to describe the situation to him and why we were so worried. Outlining all of the things I've already said. Night, gunnery, pairs. We don't want to go to a war zone when we don't know how this is affecting us, long term or short term. We don't.
Yeah.
It's so insidious. We're just not sure. Okay, cool. So it looks like, from the brigadier's point of view, that the OC is leading a mutiny because 20 of his pilots don't want to fly. And the 21st guy, he was a nice guy, but I don't think he fully understands the situation either, to be honest. Anyway, and his colonels were just ripping into us. They were like defense attorneys. They were like, being just absolute dickholes to the entire group. If anybody raised a point, it was, semantics. It was immediate defensiveness. It was like arguing with a narcissistic ex-girlfriend. It was just terrible. Um, and we were clearly not getting anywhere because it was always just all denials and no, it's your problem and you just don't feel safe in this aircraft. What's wrong? Anyway, we took a break and the colonels, thank God, did not come in for the next session. And it was just the brigadier and 20 guys that didn't want to fly, and
Whose life is flying?
who live for flying. Like we
Yeah.
we would, if the doctor asked you, is there anything else wrong? Nope. We could
Yeah.
we could have two severed arm tendons and we'd still go flying. Like you would regularly lie to the doctor about your health in order to
Yeah.
not get stopped flying.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting grounded was absolute death. And we knew what we were like. We're getting ready to go to Afghanistan. It's like telling a football player that he's not going to get a game on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. And
like
you're
send me in.
essentially saying goodbye to Afghanistan by
Uh,
by doing this.
we didn't know how long the downtime was going to be, but we knew that we needed a procedure when this happened to check the health of the aircraft, to ensure the health of the pilots, and to manage
Yeah.
the risk. And none of that was happening at the time. So we're like, look, let's just establish a procedure where we take a safety pause. We do a quality assurance check of the aircraft to make sure that they're all up to standard. Maybe we'll be able to find out what's going on. Let's put something in place, for God's sake. Like, how hard is it to give us, a sense of confidence that we're not going to die? Anyway, when the second session started, this is all being recorded, by the way, on video as well, because for whatever reason, man, I don't know where that tape is now, but it would make fantastic 60 minutes fodder. And my OC was looking really sort of put upon. You could, the people in the room could almost feel the pressure of leadership that was on him at the time. And credit to him, he stood there and he didn't move. He's like, look, I know my guys are serious about this, and I back them 100%. He was between a rock and a hard place, because he was getting commanded to make us fly, and he would not give that command, which is amazing. Anyway, in the end, what happened was, because I had so many of these incidents, and because I was one of the senior guys, I was the unit maintenance test pilot, I had more knowledge, technical knowledge about this incident. I had flown the latest problem aircraft and experienced the latest incident, and had the most out of anybody. I'm like, hey sir, can I say something? And he looked at me. He's like, yeah, sure. I'm like, all right. When you say that you're taking this seriously, we don't believe you. And he looked shocked. And I'm like, he started to get defensive. And one of my proudest career moments, and possibly the end of my career in total, I said, sir, if you'll just shut up and let me finish.
A career-limiting move.
Yeah, I was acutely aware of what was happening, and I think I held up my hand and doing the whole, soft stop, like, hey, just fucking listen. We don't believe you because, you'd made all of these promises, and I rattled them off. I knew them off by heart. You promised us new planning software. That's not arrived. You promised us new uniforms. You promised us new this. You promised us a trip to wherever for qualifications. Yeah, and I just rattled off all of these promises that he'd made over the last, 2 or 3 years, and none of them had come to fruition. The first incident happened in 2010. That was me. You said you'd get to the bottom of it. You didn't. You said you'd fixed it in 2011. You didn't. You said you'd fixed it this year. You didn't. You said that you're taking this seriously, but we're just on a brainstorming session on shit that involves things like Japanese fans in the cockpit to increase air currents. We're pretty sure you don't know what the fuck is going on. So just shut up and listen to the people who actually do know what's going on. And I just, by that stage, I was like, the horses had already bolted, and I was along for the ride. I'm just like, I was pretty steamed up by this point. And to my credit, I remember being quite measured, and I remember, tearing my gaze away from him for a moment and looking around the room to see all of the other pilots slowly nodding, and sort of, it was kind of like in agreement, but also encouragement. It was like, yep, you're on the track.
Please just keep going.
Just look,
take one for the team.
Yeah. You're the sacrificial lamb here, Frosty. Then just lean into this. And I had a very robust discussion with the brigadier about how we didn't believe a word he said, that he was completely full of shit, that we didn't trust him or his team or his aircraft or any of the processes that he'd put in place. And on top of that,
actions to earn your trust.
Yeah, and on top of that, the fact that he didn't believe us was the icing on the cake, because every year they came out with a new safety initiative, like if you see something, say something, or stop. Anybody can say stop at any time for a safety hazard. There was like you can throw the safety ace. You can put your hand up for safety. If you see something on, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many safety things where we're encouraged to speak up, and we're literally in front of you telling you that there's something wrong with your aircraft, and you want us to ignore it. I'm sorry, we're not buying it. So he came out of that meeting with a different perspective, thank God. He immediately implemented or engaged an investigation company called Shannon, I think they're called. They call themselves the Red X Company, and they specialize in problem solving in that type of complex problem.
Yeah.
So in the following months, they turned up. They did an in-depth investigation. They did interviews with each of us. They did bias removing calculations. They were able to quantify our answers to open-ended questions, which was something I'd never experienced before, and just blew my mind. In the space of a week, they found out what the problem was. A week. We'd been waiting 3 years 2.5 years by that point. And these guys had solved the problem in a week. So as it turns out, the drip tray that catches all the fluids, oils, and lubricants from the transmission, we thought was one and then connected to a single hose down through the bottom of the aircraft. We thought it just dripped out on the ground or into the air as we flew. As it turns out, it went about halfway through the aircraft and then onto another drip tray with an air gap. And that drip tray was directly above a very hot hydraulic component. So basically, it was like dripping toxic oils and lubricants onto a fry pan and then breathing in the contents, because the air conditioner intake was right next to this drip tray. And we couldn't believe the stupidity of the design. I'm sorry, what? Like, anyway, what they did after they found the fume path, and they found it with some very creative methods, they found that, yes, fumes can get in the cockpit. Fumes from this area, what are they likely to consist of? Well, they took a sample of all the different oils, lubricants, air conditioning oil, all these types of things that would possibly be spilt, cleaning solution, like aircraft wax, like all of this stuff. And mixed it in different ratios, and then heated it in a microwave to 120 degrees, which they found was about the point that it started fumating. And that was about how hot the hydraulic system got. Yeah. And then they locked themselves in an airproof, like a tent, and they all passed.
They got themselves high.
Basically, they got themselves high. 2 of them had to go to hospital. I think the others had the day off the next day. They were so sick. They experienced the entire range of symptoms that we had been exposed to and had reported. There was some that got immediately hypoxic and flushed face. They had lightheadedness. They felt nausea. All of them experienced the whole range. Yeah. And they were recording all this, stuff, I guess, as scientifically as they could.
Yeah.
But they found the smoking gun, and I instantly felt vindicated, and everybody breathed a sigh of relief, followed by well, what the fuck do we do about it?
Yeah.
Because now we know how bad it is and how bad it could be. We also know that there's nothing we can do about it, because
what about any long-term effects?
That, but also here we had an aircraft which is fundamentally flawed. It was taking air from a contaminated, closed space in the
cockpit. It's by its very design, it's going to make its pilots high.
Basically, at any stage, if any of the components on the transmission failed and started to leak, we were going to have a fumes incident. It was inevitable.
Yeah.
And we couldn't really wrap our head around it. We were like, a couple of us who were handy on the tools were like, if we go to Bunnings and buy some 90 millimeter stormwater pipe, we can put some vents on the windows. At least then we'll have fresh air. We're just going to silicon these, vents into the into the perspex windows with a jigsaw and a couple of rivets. We were racking our brain. We're like, how we can't operate without air conditioning because it gets so hot. The air conditioning takes its air from there. Okay, well, how long does it take to redesign an air conditioning system? As it turns out, that's not feasible. I think it was going to cost $2 million per aircraft to implement the change. On top of that, you'd be hamstrung by the contractor's ability to do it. It was such a fundamental change that they had to implement that it was unworkable. So what they did instead was then, because they identified the problem, they implemented a cleaning solution. So the cleaning procedure, they identified that maintenance test flying was the most likely to be exposed, and that's why I'd had so many. That aircraft over a period of time leak, that's just the nature of them. They're just always leaking. And whenever they're in the hangar for any period of time, that oil would accumulate and just be more susceptible to fumate.
Right. So they're not stopping the problem. They're just basically preventing it from adding up.
Yeah. So they looking at the risk management model, they implemented an after top event type, a before top event type procedure, where they were like, we can't stop this from happening altogether. We can't stop the leaks. It's just the nature of an aircraft. But what we can do is minimize the amount of the likelihood that it's going to happen by making sure that the aircraft is super clean before it departs. Therefore, at least it's starting with a clean sort of area. And the only thing that can happen is during the flight, which generally only go for two hours. Sometimes we'd fly them, multiple refuels for, a whole day or whatever. But
as you said, this was occurring every 6 months. So it's taking a while to build up.
Yeah, that's right. And, not every aircraft had the problem either. Some aircraft had multiple sort of incidents of this happening. But anyway, so they created a new procedure where the maintainers would thoroughly clean the area, make sure it was spick and span basically,
Yeah.
before they released the aircraft to us. Fantastic. How good. Now we know what's happening. We know the likely effects. We know, and everybody by this stage had hypoxia training. We'd gone and breathed, you know, we'd gone and done a training session at the aviation medical facility down in Adelaide. We'd
Yeah.
had multiple exposures to hypoxia, so we knew what our individual symptoms were, what our co-pilot's individual symptoms were, and we
Yep.
would regularly talk about it. So we had a much greater awareness of this stuff. On top of that, we tried an old procedure where we were using our HEEDS bottle, our underwater escape scuba tank, basically to supplement our oxygen. And
Yep.
we would practice this in the simulator, and then to simulate the fumes, somebody would come in unexpectedly and spray deodorant through the simulator window to simulate that a fume was happening. So
Yep.
then we would try to get our
Try to
breathing
react.
apparatus in and try to react.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a perfect procedure by any means, but if the windows were stuck or you couldn't land you couldn't take your hands off the controls or whatever, for whatever reason, then it was
Yeah.
something. So
Yeah.
we managed to skin it okay. But 6 months later, guess what? Another fumes incident.
Oh no.
Could not believe it. So one of the maintainers had incorrectly applied the cleaning procedure. Instead of
Okay.
using a particular type of cleaning solution, he'd used a different type. And I was on a test flight, and I was actually trialing a new procedure where I didn't fly too far away from base. One of the problems that we kept on facing was that for test flights, I would have to regularly fly more than half an hour away from base in Darwin. And
Yeah.
I'd regularly land, it was like more than an hour's car travel time away from base, which was just too impractical if something went wrong. Sometimes
Yeah.
these little niggles or whatever would happen with the aircraft, and you have to land. It was so far away that recovery took all day.
Yeah.
Which was just impractical more than anything.
Yep.
So I was trialing a procedure where I remained in airspace over Darwin, over an unpopulated area, and did my flying. Unfortunately, it just wasn't working this day. There was too much RPT, like regular passenger aircraft
Yep.
coming in. There was like Dash 8s coming in from the islands and all this all the time. So I was limited with what I could do, and I was stuck at a certain altitude. I think it was like 4,000 feet. I was trying to do a test procedure, and I couldn't get down. I couldn't fly anywhere that I wanted to fly, and it was just taking forever. And then I had fumes in the cockpit, and it was burning my eyes. It was screeching my lungs. Like I just remember the searing pain of this.
So a different set of symptoms to previous.
Yeah, really, really different. But man, it makes my eyes water. I'm getting all tingly now just thinking about it. Like it was absolutely brutal. That it was an alcohol-based cleaning solution that had accumulated on the drip tray and started fumating. And alcohol, fumate's pretty low temperature. So
Yeah.
it was absolutely just brutal. And I remember the stab of anger that I felt. Like, God damn it, we knew this. Like, what the hell has happened? And I immediately put the aircraft into a nosedive to get down to a more sensible level to see if I could sort it out and land. And I could see the base. Like I wasn't that far away from Robertson Barracks
Yeah.
where we were due to land. So I just put this thing basically a crash dive and just bounced off every single limit I could on the way down. I think I was tearing towards the ground at 150 or 160 knots or something. I was just so fucking angry that this had
Yeah.
happened again. I was, I just like, fuck that checklist. I'm just getting something on the ground. And what a piece of shit, garbage piece of shit. I was so like apocalyptic at the time, just like, I just can't believe it's happening again. And I just did the world's worst landing. It was the equivalent of someone just throwing their cricket bat on the ground after getting out. I was just so
Yeah.
angry. I dumped this thing on the ground and just walked away in disgust. And the maintainer, admitted his mistake. He didn't think it was going to be a problem or something. And the guy that had supervised it, because it was a pretty tight maintenance procedure, it required a supervisor to sign off that it had been done correctly. Turns out he had not done his job either. So he had not supervised correctly, and he came to me in tears. He was a guy that I'd known for years and years and years. Like we had been to Timor together, 10 years before. And here's a guy that he came to me in tears, apologizing. He immediately transferred to a different section where he wasn't in charge of maintenance anymore.
Oh wow.
He was done. He had his own trauma from that incident that he couldn't believe that he'd.
The what ifs.
Exactly. Yeah, he couldn't believe that he put someone at risk by neglecting something seemingly so small. And I remember being pretty angry at the time, and I I can't remember what I said, but I don't think I was very receptive to his apology. I think maybe I said something nice to make him feel better, but I wasn't feeling it. And
Yeah.
if he's out there, he knows who he is. We'll have a chat and a beer one time about it. But
Yeah.
I remember going home and my wife could sense that something was wrong, and I didn't have the heart to tell her.
Yeah.
It was like just yeah. Anyway, you wouldn't believe it, but we kept on having these same sort of things. They were, I guess, less frequent and now of a different type.
Yeah.
But the final straw, and I was feeling quite pressured at this stage because I was in charge of maintenance test flying. I was in charge of new procedures. I'd regularly create or review checklist procedures and maintenance procedures to make sure that they aligned with what we were trying to achieve for the aircraft.
Yeah.
I was encouraging other pilots to do the same. I'm like, hey, if you can see an error, come to me with a requested change, highlighting the error and what you think it should be. And I was really kind of empowering all of the junior guys to get amongst the change and be part of the process and take ownership over the aircraft and its technical documents and procedures and SOPs so that we could rapidly evolve into what we needed to be. If we kept putting pressure on the system, the failure would not be with us failing to implement changes. The failure would be on some other person not implementing them fast enough and not having a
Yeah.
system that was receptive to changes that were helping us tactically. And I used to say that, I'm like, if it's an immediate tactical advantage, let's put that change request in now, high priority. If it's a long-term maintenance change, well, it's slightly less priority, but still let's load this system up so that
Yeah.
they know how serious we are about improving this
It's
and
never,
making ourselves
yeah, it's
better.
never going to be something because we didn't say it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was really, really hammering everybody on that, and they probably got sick of me. But I like to think that that was the legacy that I left when I finally did leave. That the change process had basically been established and could maintain itself. Everybody had enough corporate knowledge to make changes happen, regardless of who was in charge at the time, which was nice. But
Well, if we go back to when the problem was identified with the fluid thing, did you ever hear from the brigadier?
so after our intimate discussion with 20 other pilots in the room,
Yeah.
I became his favorite dude. I remember being out water skiing one Sunday morning. It was like 9 o'clock. I regularly water skied out in Darwin. Used to get out on the lake, 6 a.m. or whatever. And I got a text message. I'm like, what the hell? Why does it say Commander 16? Hey, Matt, thought I'd let you know I've just signed a document to implement this and implement that. And, future's looking great. I'm like, what the fuck am I getting a text message from Commander 16 Brigade for on a Sunday morning? And I saw it for what it was. It was basically just a show of force, just him sort of waving the colors like, hey, this is me doing my thing. And, I want you to know that I'm on your side and I totally understand and support you. This is after he'd already contracted a psychologist to write a report saying that our symptoms were psychosomatic and completely undermining our safety reports. And
Yeah.
this is after he'd absolutely rubbished my name to everybody who'd listen. And this is after he didn't believe 20 pilots, had a safety. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Anyway, I actually took that text message to my OC. I'm like, hey, can you stop this from happening? And he's like, yeah, that should never happen. And I'm like, thank you. Yes. Anyway, it didn't happen again. But I think he realized that maybe that was not the best way to go about raising morale. And I didn't see him very often after that. And honestly, if I saw him sort of now, I don't know what I'd do actually. I'd like to think that I would be super ballsy about it, but he is almost single-handedly to blame for a lot of the trauma that I have dealt with, and that still makes me feel shit from time to time. So,
yeah,
it'd be an interesting discussion, and I hope this makes it to him eventually. But fuck you.
Yeah. And look, and that's something that I've been really finding out. I've got a podcast lined up in a few weeks with a really interesting lady, a professor from Griffith University, whose specialty is organizational trauma and moral injury, that type of thing. And organizations are so much more to blame for trauma than traumatic events.
Uh, and
That
couldn't
betrayal.
agree more. Couldn't agree more. And yeah, here's an entire organization who lives and breathes safety. And the moment we have a safety issue, did their utmost to ignore,
Yeah,
bad mouth and completely deny everything that we were reporting. And
yeah,
that really cut us to the bone. On top of that, during this time, and I can't remember the exact details, but we had I think it was forces commander. There was it's a weird structure in the army, and honestly, I can't remember off the top of my head. But the, he was a he was a red tab. He was a major general, I want to say. Basically came up and called us a pack of catchy next Tuesdays to our face. And I remember being in the room and I looking at my OC and he was looking at me. He's like, "Don't say anything.
pull the
Don't."
reins.
He's like, I know you want to argue with him, but don't do it. And look, I've got a pretty strong, sense of justice and moral judgment, for better or worse. It's the
Yeah,
autistic in me, to some extent, but that strong sense of justice when he got up there and said a whole heap of things wrong and then called us the bad guys. That rubbed
yeah,
me the wrong way. And that was during the time where, he's like, "Right, you are now suspended from flying." And we're like, "I'm sorry, what? Are you grounding us?" He's like, I was thinking to myself, he's like, "Yes, that's right, you're grounded. Because otherwise it looks like a mutiny, and we can't handle a mutiny in the Australian Army. The Australian Army never has mutinies, so you're all grounded." And this was about the time that somebody leaked information to the Australian, I think, and it
I
became a
was literally just about to ask, has this ever
yeah,
been like
yeah,
caught by mainstream media?
yeah. It has. It made front page news at some stage,
Yeah.
with enough details that enough correct details that was pretty serious. Pilots refused to fly over safety concerns, mutiny over safety concerns, or something like that.
Yeah.
And none of us at the time really knew who was responsible for the leak, but we were getting absolutely hammered for it.
Yep.
Somebody here in this room is leaking to the media, and that needs to stop. And you're being Jack and your mates, and all of the army terms associated with that.
Yep.
But I don't think anybody in the room thought that anybody was being Jack. I think everybody in the room was like, somebody needed to know,
Yeah.
and that took genuine courage. Full disclosure, I was not that person, but I do. I have been
Yeah.
able to identify who that was in subsequent years, and I've got a lot of respect for them. That
But
that
so, I
took
was going to
real.
say, sometimes until things are made public, things don't change.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the pressure that we needed, I think, to get action in certain areas. Whether the action would have happened anyway, eventually, I don't know. But everybody in the room, I think, at the
But
time,
the problem with eventually generally involves somebody dying.
and that's the problem we were facing. Because for this to get any action, we felt like somebody was going to have to die to be
Yeah.
taken seriously. And pilots have died before things were taken seriously. We're like, we
Yeah.
are at that crossroads now. Will you not listen to us? And because we were part of this, we were the system, we were the safety system. Like this, the system didn't work without us doing at it. We were reporting things that never needed to be reported. We were dobbing ourselves in. Hey, I was
Yep.
unprepared for the flight and it led to a safety occurrence. I could have
Yep.
very easily ignored that. I broke multiple rules on one flight because I was unaware of a certain rule that had just been implemented. Hey, I'm super sorry, sir. I did not know that applied to me on that particular day. I will do better in the future. I wrote a safety report on myself, giving
Yep.
myself an absolute bollocking because that was what was required, because that was going to be passed around and everybody could learn a lesson and be a better pilot because of my mistake. So
Yep.
that's the type of, and that's what they call a generative safety culture, where people volunteer their mistakes so that others can learn from them.
Yep.
That mistakes aren't hidden or punished, but all of a sudden, when the commanders who created that system then try to abuse that system for their own,
Yeah.
it really did not sit well with a lot of us. And I know since that incident, since that round circle discussion, the pilots in that room, at least half aren't flying anymore.
Yep.
There are several who are suffering really debilitating trauma-related
Yep.
illnesses, and have trouble talking about it. They've
Yeah.
had breakdowns, relationship trouble, like all of the
Yeah.
follow-on downhill stuff that comes from that sort of moral injury.
It's a moral betrayal. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's offensive against everything you are as a person. When you
It
feel that way, it, it's worse than PTSD in many respects.
it
It's
yeah.
different to PTSD, but the trouble is
It
at the moment is it is classed as PTSD.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and the research that I've done, much like when you blow your knee out and become a knee specialist, I've become a moral injury specialist,
Yeah.
just for, just due to my own interest. But the you know the the moral injury is the first thing that happens when you before the PTSD. The PTSD
Yeah.
happens because you haven't done anything about it, or because it's manifested in a certain way because of other things or whatever. But yeah, it really ground us the wrong way, the way that we were treated during that time, and
Yeah.
um, not dealing with it appropriately after. It was all swept under the carpet after as well. We didn't have any debrief sessions. It just went away. All of a sudden, the brigadier was
Yeah.
just kind of
So
didn't show up very often because
there's no public vindication. There's
there was
no,
there
yeah.
was no, hey, yep, we fucked up and we're sorry. There was no personal apologies about writing a report, trying to trying to undercut my name and my safety reports.
Yeah.
None of that. It was just
Yeah.
all made to go away, and nobody ever talked about it ever again.
All right, folks, we're going to end part 4 there. Make sure you continue listening in for part 5 of our conversation with Captain Matt Frost. Thanks for tuning in to be on the call.